So hello everyone, and welcome to this session about how newsrooms report on development stories. My name is Thomas Frostberg. I'm going to moderate this session where we'll hear three different examples from the real world that have done this and can share what worked and maybe what did not work. We'll see. So this is a session about how journalists can build strong links between people from different sides of the world. And with us are three grantees from the European Journalist Center and different programs. And if you want to know more about the EJC and what they do, Elise here in the front row, you can grab her afterwards. She can tell you all about the grants you can apply for. It's really worth talking with her afterwards. And especially we hope to focus and get some stories how the development reporting has actually moved into the mainstream of the newsrooms with, for example, migration, climate, and gender issues, and potentially how that has changed the newsrooms. And I've done a bit of that reporting myself through one of the grants where I worked for Dagens, a Swedish morning paper, on as editor for global development. And it's been an interesting journey, so we'll see if I can teach you to come up with some more challenging things. But we're going to start with the three examples. They're going to give a short presentation after that, followed by a moderated discussion, and I'll invite you as well to ask questions during the second half of the session. So let's start with CNN, and Blathnaid, Healy, you're the director for CNN Digital International for the EMEA region, and have also been the UK editor for Mashable before. So please go ahead with your presentation.
Journalism Festival and also the EJC for being here today. It's really great to talk a little bit about As Equals. So I'm the editor of As Equals, but what I show you today is the work of a lot of people. There's a team of developers and producers and other people that work across this project. So it's a real privilege to present this. So As Equals is a series that's focused on gender inequality in the least developed parts of the world. We started it just over a year ago, and with support from the EJC. So I'm just going to move this away a little bit. And I'm going to just go through three sort of takeaways from our first year of this series. It's now continuing into a second year. So to start off with, the first, after sort of 12 months, one of the big sort of takeaways is with this sort of reporting where you're, for us it's gender inequality and it's empowering women. That's the big sort of development focus for us in this project. Our takeaway and sort of our objective, I guess, it was an objective at the start, was to really identify connection points and commonalities between your story subjects and your audience. So doing this in both sort of a macro way and a micro way. On a micro way in terms of the stories that you choose and the devices that you use to storytell. So the story example there that's on the mobile phone, with that we've used a storytelling device where we've replicated the WhatsApp messages that were exchanged between the subjects of the story, and recreated those in a storytelling form. WhatsApp is, hugely, obviously, universal communication platform in Malawi, where Roz Warren reported the story from. Women are using WhatsApp to find abortions. This is sort of how the backstreet abortion trade is happening. So instead of, just writing a long piece, we also wanted to give some sense of how those conversations play out and bring those kind of more immediate stories into the mix. In terms of then the sort of the larger theme of the connection points, for the year we really focused on three big areas: power, stigma, and safety. I think these around the world for women, be that in the least developed parts of the world or in more developed countries, these are all common threads in the sort of the continuing fight for gender equality that we face. So around power, it was subjects like politics, education, land ownership. Stigma, it was things like periods, childlessness, HIV, STD, sexual health and well-being. For safety, it's things like gender-based violence, child marriage. The second big takeaway is that we didn't want to put development in a corner, development reporting that is. Apologies for the Dirty Dancing reference so early in this presentation. But we were really keen to not make development stories that lived on a landing page. We wanted to be sure that the stories that we were reporting and commissioning, that we could lead all of our platforms with them. So that was the intention when we commissioned, as we set out to find strong stories that we could put in what we describe at CNN as the T1, but that big sort of lead slot on our platforms. So an example of this is the Diane Rwigara case. This is all about, politics and power and representation and female representation within, this is a story from Rwanda. Diane Rwigara is an opposition politician who ran for president and then found herself jailed for over a year. We covered her story when she was still jailed. And shortly after our reporting came out, she's been released from prison, and the charges are no longer being put against her and her family. So we wanted to pick stories that we could really lean into in a big way, put in the lead slot, and then hopefully derive some impact from them. And that was a big goal throughout the year. That was a very sort of core focus of the reporting that we wanted to do. Then the third and final takeaway is that we didn't want to produce just stories that were 1,000 words with a couple of photos in them. We wanted to make stories and experiences and development journalism that was really impactful visually and also very immersive mobile experiences. So one of the examples of this was from our, let me just click to play this one. One of the examples of this is from our reporting. Are we playing this? No. Okay. Oh, wait. Let me go back. Sorry, I usually use a Mac, which is why I'm currently struggling. Here we go. This piece, we'll just talk about it anyway. I'll send links around later on. This is part of a mini series that we did around periods. 1.8 billion people on the planet menstruate, and we wanted to really lean into this subject. And so we led the site with a big package of content around periods, and part of it was this immersive tool that basically you could go through it and find out if you didn't have access to period products, how many days would you have to sit out over the course of your lifetime. So it was created for anyone in mind. Everyone on the planet could take this. And we wanted to make sure there were journeys in it for everybody. And so whether you menstruate or you don't, at the end of it you'd find out based on your age how long you would have to sit out of education, life, work, all of these things if you couldn't afford to have period products. But we also then wanted to, get at things like the stigma and whatnot that are attached to menstruation. And in terms of them, this is just another sort of example of the visual component to the As Equals series. These are the illustrations that we commissioned, illustrations for every opinion piece that we did. So these are opinion pieces by Nadia Al-Sakaf, Memory Banda, and Leima Gabawi. And each of these are illustrations by Jordan Andrew Carter. And essentially, these pieces are opinion strand, probably one of the most successful parts of the As Equals series in terms of audience engagement, especially the piece by Nadia Al-Sakaf, who wrote about how disproportionate, she wrote about some of the development challenges from the Yemeni war, but from the perspective of women, and how the war brought so much by way of responsibility, but didn't bring any empowerment, or didn't those things that might have gone along with it. That it just hasn't happened. So even with these very text kind of based pieces like op-eds, we wanted to really give them a strong visual identity that could be used across our own platforms, but also our social platforms with opinion, we also experimented with video op-eds, just to bring those kind of different dimensions to try and really reach out there and get an audience onto these stories. So if you want to check out any more from CNN as equals, we do have a landing page. Even though our stories don't live only on the landing page, there is a landing page, cnn.com// as equals, and you can see the sort of the full breadth of the reporting from over the last year or so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll be back with a question. We continue with Stan Putman. You're the digital editor for the Dutch newspaper, the Volkskrant, and you coordinated the research project about how to feed 10 billion people.
Yes. Well, hi everybody. My name is Stan Putman. Indeed, I'm one of the online editors of the Volkskrant, and last year I was responsible for our project called De Voedselzaak, about the question, how are we going to feed 10 billion people in 2050? The Volkskrant is a Dutch newspaper. It's kind of leftist, centrist. It's about 100 years old, and it kind of has it has a serious connotation. It's a serious newspaper. And we got a grant, or actually the foreign desk, together with our cross-medial department of the newsletter, got a grant to report on, and now I quote the grant submission, the Volkskrant will report on using all suitable cross-medial instruments on food corridors as a solution to fight poverty and hunger in Africa. And it kind of was my task to make this abstract and really broad grant proposal way more relatable and also more surprising, because the Volkskrant and all media have been reporting about poverty and hunger in Africa for, I don't know, for as long as it has been in existence, and also to make it a little bit more fun, because we wanted to attract new audiences who don't usually read about development, and but who are interested in something that everybody on this earth is interested in, and that's food. So we rephrased the question to how are we going to feed 10 billion people in 2050, and our focus was still on Africa, but it was a bit more in the background. A really important thing with setting up the Voedselzaak was the fact that we had about 1.5 months of building our platform and coming up with our concept. In a newsroom where there are deadlines daily or every hour, it's really rare to have so much time to build something completely off the ground, and that really helped us. So in the presentation you see on the left for you, you see the regular website of the Volkskrant, which is really boring, really, stereotypical for a news website. And on the other side, you see the website of the Voedselzaak. And coming up with the design really helped us to come up with the concepts of the stories we were going to tell as well. So we looked at websites of supermarkets, and we also looked at websites of NGOs, and we didn't want to look, we did want our website to look like a supermarket, and we didn't want to use cliché NGO imagery, and we wanted to confuse people a bit and to make the website really relatable. Apart from the design and building a new platform, something that was also really new at our newspaper was that it was a joint effort by the whole newsroom. So normally this project would have stayed at the foreign desk, and my colleagues there would be responsible for coming up with the stories and looking for a photographer, and it would have been like would have only been projects carried out by them. But from the beginning on, we asked our colleagues from the economics desk, from the op-ed section, from the science desk, and also really importantly from the lifestyle section to also participate in this project. And for every story, we also looked at the right form to tell it. So we had a lot of written pieces that were published in the newspaper, but also on the website. But we produced podcasts, we produced videos, we had 5 live events, we had an ebook, etc. I'll quickly walk you through 4 stories or things that were exemplary for the way we reported on food security. The backbone of the project were stories about African countries and about issues they're facing related to food, of course. So on the top left, you see a woman standing on a beach in Mauritania. This photograph was made for a story about Chinese vessels that are now fishing in front of the shores of West Africa, and they are using the fish to produce fish meal, and then that fish meal is being exported to China to feed cattle there, and the fish disappears from West Africa. And there are, it's kind of a horrible story. So that was the most conventional reporting we did. This is wrong in the world, this is why, and these are the people that are suffering from it. But we also really tried to find more solution-based stories and more surprising stories. So the picture next to it is made in the middle of the Sahel Desert in Niger. The idea of deserts is always, it's sandy, it's gray, you can't grow anything there. But we visited a project where they actually used super old techniques from before French colonization to grow crops in a desert, and it actually works out. And was really, we got a really big audience engagement with it. People were surprised with it. People were, it really goes into, or goes against the narrative that exists about desertification, and it's a solution that's actually scalable. So it's also super interesting how they are going to use this technique in other parts of Africa. On the bottom, you see a picture of a dish, because we got our food writers also involved in this project. So we actually came up with a recipe guide, because and an environmentally friendly recipe guide. Because when you report on what's wrong with the world or on big issues, it's really hard. I can imagine that readers will end up sitting like, okay, but what can I do? So we hoped that with a couple of recipes, people would be able to find a bit more, well. And we also made an online test where you can fill out all your regular groceries, and then we would come up with different groceries that were more environmentally friendly or that were more in season. The last picture you see is our agricultural minister in the middle, walking together with 2 publicists who wrote an essay for the Voedselzaak. One really big part of our project was our op-ed section, because we really tried to involve our readers and people in the field. And they wrote a piece about bridging the gap that exists between the really ecologically minded people in agriculture and the really high efficient minded and really eco-modernist, they call it, people. And it's a big debate in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is a really big agricultural country. And the minister read the piece and asked for us to meet with the publicist, and we made another article of this. In the end, we published over 100 different pieces in a year time. And I think it was kind of successful. It's strange to say, but yeah, but I think one of the main reasons was that we brought a really good mix of different kind of stories. So we sandwiched a heavy story about land grabbing or geopolitics together with a more tech story or science story about lab-grown meat or urine as a way to fertilize the ground. We also one takeaway for other people who work in development or in journalism and want to report on development is that it's really important to get everybody involved in reporting on development. So trying to get the whole newsroom involved, but also inviting your readers and people in the field to get involved. And I think that our constructive approach, which we didn't make explicit, but in the end we did have a constructive approach, was also, it was also a good way to don't have people being sad at the end of the day. So they had the feeling that they could do something about it. So yeah, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stan. And our third speaker today is coming from LPI and the innovation area of the paper. Guiomar, co-director for LPI Lab.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You also, we see the migration new arrivals project coming up here,
Yes.
where you worked on as design lead.
Sorry. Well, yes. Hello, everybody. I come from El País, is the Spanish language leading newspaper, and I'm going to explain one of the most complex projects in which I've participated as a reporter of El País. It's called the new arrivals. Sorry, and it was a project supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the EGC, sorry. And it was an approach that for European newspapers about the migration phenomenon in Europe, in different countries. This phenomenon, as you know, is now on the top of the news in South Europe, in Spain, and here in Italy. And what El País team put the focus on was in a amateur football team based in Jerez de la Frontera, in Cádiz, in south of Spain, that was made up of migrants that came from Latin America and from Africa. And we put the focus on these people, to translate to the public the reality, the numbers, and the migration in Spain. We did the report there during 500 days, and we use video. We send reporters to this space. And there were a 10 people team, interdisciplinary team, that carry on with the project. The team is called Alma de Africa, it's African Soul. And this is one of the first photos that we published in our coverage. And I think it's from Juan Carlos Torres, one of our photographers. And I think this photo it's a good picture of the purpose of the project, because we're deep inside the team to explain how it was to be an immigrant in Spain. Sorry. The concept of once we defined the what, it was the team reality. We also put an special effort in the way that we are going to drive this report. We designed a specially microsite, custom microsite, in which we can archive and publish all the material that we published, long format documentary video, in-depth text reports from our reporters, and interactive infographics. And also we use in a very hard way the new narratives and the new formats, just to offer, as Nayara Galarraga said, that she's the leader she was the leader of the project. Now she's our Brazil correspondent. What we wanted is what she expressed is that we wanted to offer data, facts, and context to explain migration, not only in a deep way, but also an engaging way. This is the look that the website, the first part of the new arrivals project. This is the microsite with a special custom design, in which, as you can see, there are a lot of little pieces of content, and in the top part of the page, you can see that the different chapters of our coverage. The most important thing here is that we put a special focus on the human side, and also in the new narratives and the new formats. In highlighting the human side, we produced a lot of video, as one. And this one on the left presented the football players as characters in a movie. And it was the way that we used to present that in social media, and there's no sound. So. Also, with the testimonies of these players, that we follow them through their lives to know how it was to arrive in Spain and to get papers and to get a work, or how they perceive their lives. And sorry, this is in Spanish, but I think.
Le dije, ¿cómo? Me dice, en patera. Le digo, no. Dije, no voy. El peor viaje de mi vida, sinceramente. Nunca volvería a hacerlo. No se lo reprocho, pero yo, sinceramente, yo como papá no dejaría a mi hijo entrar en un barco yendo para allá.
Penso, la paro, se la devuelvo, entro, paro. Realmente euros comería igual. Sí, ¿te harán insure pongas? ¿La está comiendo, niña? Sí, yo no puedo. Sí.
Modu, he explains that he arrived Spain in a little boat and in a dinghy, and he explains how his father told him to use that to arrive Spain. And this is one of the testimonies that we publish and that we share on social media and all our reports. The other part of this effort it was the new formats and innovation in the way that we are telling stories and data. In this case, it was an interactive tree map to show the readers the composition of the immigration, the composition of Spain's population, and which part of this population is formed by migrants and where they come from. Because now, as you know, the immigration is a political weapon and is used in the populism speech. And I think it's the best way to explain and to translate the reality using this type of formats. Also, we tried another type of storytelling using this chronology of how Spain has worked to to prevent people from coming from other countries. And this is a chronology that an illustrator put in a illustrated video to show this long explanation in a few minutes video. The new arrivals project had a regular presence in both El País and Homepage, in the digital and also in the print edition during several days. This coverage was in the main part of the homepage in different days. So when you say what happens in newsroom when this type of topics go in the first page, I think that this helps journalists to understand the complexity and when you put it in a deep way, I think it creates quality content for your readers. At the end of the 500 days of work in this project, we published a lot of pieces of content, 6 long documentary videos, and also another smaller one, dozens of them with pieces of content, more than 200 photos, and a lot of interactive infographics and reports that were shared and read by thousands of readers. One of the most important things that we noticed when we analyzed the data was that this content got what we call qualified users. Is one of the most valuable right now for newspapers, because they are loyal, they come back, and they spend in our pages more time than the average of our website. So I think that when there's a quality content in your site or in your newspaper, this can bring quality readers. That I think is very important in this moment. And the best part, beside the coverage and the readers' response, was that we got some awards, and it's fine, because I think that the effort has something back. The project with all the newspapers was awarded with a drum online media, and also one of our developments in design got also a bronze medal in design awards. So I think that this is an important boost to this type of formats and the way of explaining immigration, complex topics with another language. And it's all. If you have some questions, I'd love to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all three of you. I'll start off with a few questions, and then we will open up for the audience to come in the discussion. So all three of you show that you have done some extra efforts on layout, graphics, and presentation that is really impressive. And to continue on the metaphor side, does that mean that you, like Mary Poppins said, you need a spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down? Do you need to make it extra nice to engage the audience to actually read and take care of the development reporting? Who want to go first?
I don't think that this is something that you should have with this type of reporting. I think that we must do it with all the complex topics, because usually the immigration in Spain is related to poor people or bad news or political problems. So I think that the way that we should explain that is not with colors and sugar, but with deepen knowledge and deepen explanation and clear explanations. I think these formats help this goal.
I would say that the visual conversation about the project was the series was one of the first conversations that we had. It was the conversation about what we were going to call it, and what it was going to look like, and how it was going to appear to the audience. With gender equality and empowering women, and with the series being about women, we wanted to make sure that we weren't making it only for women. And so we thought an awful lot about how we could make this subject feel quite universal to the audience. We talked a lot about the colour scheme. For example, we were completely averse to pinks and purples and colours that sometimes come with stories and coverage about women. We were also really drawn to using something beyond the English language. That's why we went with the equal sign, which was imbalanced and then balanced, and we played with that as a visual concept, because we wanted something that felt quite universal to reach sort of various audiences, and that you could use it even without any language in kind of a social way. And I think it has, that then when we look at the stats on the pieces that are not text driven, you see really high completion rates, really long engagement times, people moving through it in sort of more of, I guess, experiential kind of way. So I would say that it does help, but at the back of that, you still need really strong stories where you're communicating something and there's a big takeaway from it. So you can't dress nothing up, right? You need substance at the back of all of it.
I totally agree with the last thing you say, but the thing is, like at the Volkskrant, we already have really good reporters, and we've been doing reporting for ages, so that was all right, but or that I didn't worry about up front, but creating a new platform and creating a new visual language that people would recognize and that they would come back to, and that they would feel part of a group actually who's following the Voedselzaak. I think the whole new branding and the whole new brand really helped with that. So it also, we made a special newsletter and a special Facebook page that also all had the look and feel of the Voedselzaak. And I think we saw that we had a really loyal audience who came to our events. So coming up with a new brand with its own design really made people coming back to us.
So if you're then one of the grassroots members of a newsroom and not the director or an editor, and you're really engaged in these issues, but have a slight feeling that the management team on the newsroom hasn't really got it yet, what's your best advice how to pitch this to an editor to get them on board on increased and better development reporting?
I think the key thing in everything that we have, everything that we have commissioned is the stories, they have to go deep on something, that can't do these kind of wide, look at a subject. All the stories that are being commissioned, is sort of reaching in, finding a specific thread within that, that isn't, it's not treating it with a sense of otherness. That's, again, kind of going back to finding that connection point. And, so I think that's the commonality between all of the stories that we have commissioned from the sort of the batch of pitches, both internally and externally. And that comes from knowing what you're writing or covering, because we wanted to make sure that our reporting resonated within the countries that we were reporting on. If we were reporting on a piece from Malawi or Lesotho, we've used a mix of reporters who are both from the country and reporters who went to the country. And the goal was to make sure that we could, that the reporting was relevant locally as well as being relevant internationally, so that we could start conversations locally that would hopefully lead to some change. So I think from the outset with the pitch, we actually set out a framework for pitching. So, you know, like if your story wasn't something we could lead on, then we weren't really going to commission it. And, you know, so I think talk to the commissioning editors, find out what that framework for pitching is. And then I would say, you know, don't pitch a whole load of things, but really develop a specific pitch and put time into, getting some depth to it and authenticity.
And something that we kept looking for was the what's in it for me angle. So we always looked for an angle with the reader, with the consumer, but or with policy by the European Union or policy by Dutch government. So we looked, we really specifically looked and asked for that.
In our case, I think that El País has done an important effort in development coverage. Now it has a section called Planeta Futuro. In this section, the reporters, they usually travel to the countries, the development countries, and I think that my personal advice is that when we go there and we explain that what happened there, as you were there as a reader, I think it's the best way to translate the importance of the projects, or different projects, or the different ways of making things better. In this type of reporting, precisely the development report is one of the most innovative in the way they work. So we in the El País Lab, we cooperate with them to make this happen, to bring people to know these stories in this other way.
As always in these events, we also have a lot of experts in the room, so go ahead with your questions. Yes, and please be nice and present yourself as well. Oh, we have a mic here. We're coming. Great.
I was wondering about the name. The new arrivals is very clear, and this migration is clear, but the names like as equals and the Futsalsack. I was wondering about the empowerment of the power of as equals. How did you came to that? 1 second, just to finish. To that, because to me it doesn't sound very powerful. I mean, that's of course my subjective opinion. And the Futsalsack is very clear to me. It is. I do speak Dutch, so it's very clear into what you were explaining. But it still, how did you came with that name?
We talked about it a lot. We had a lot of different options. It was very early on trying to figure out something that for us felt that that we were taking a stance, in the sense that CNN is saying gender inequality is something we've got to address, and people should live as equals, learn as equals, work as equals, love as equals. That these were, sort of principles of the reporting project, and that was where we stood on the issue of gender inequality. I mean, these things are obviously always really subjective. The other thing that we thought about was how that language would travel on social. So it had to be something very short. It had to be something that wasn't already being used as a hashtag on, by other organizations. So we did a lot of competitive analysis just to make sure that we weren't going to sort of run into other projects. And obviously there's a lot in the space. So between all of those sort of conversations, that narrowed us into as equals, which was the consensus in the end. But yeah, these things are always subjective.
And with the Futsalzaak, it's kind of a wordplay. Zaak means case in Dutch, so the case of food or the case for food. And at the same time, zaak also means shop, so the food shop. And we really, at the website, if you look at it, we put at all the stories, we put like one specific food that is exemplary for the story we were reporting on at the front page of the website. So you would see different groceries at the website. So it was a wordplay on that.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Anya Schifrin from Columbia University, and I've spent probably about 15 years sort of analyzing development reporting in the Global South. So 2 questions. One of the things that I'm hearing lately in many of the countries I look at is that there isn't enough of a local audience for these stories, and they're not really helping solve the revenue problem, which is the big problem in many places, especially sub-Saharan Africa. And then I've also written quite extensively on the role of donors in sort of directing the coverage. Clearly Gates is a very directive donor, and I was just wondering if you could speak to either of those questions. I know you talked a little bit about local audiences earlier. Thank you very much. This is a very interesting panel.
Thanks, Richard Black, former BBC journalist. Implicit in the ideas of both the CNN and the Volkskrant ideas was the idea of reaching new audiences that wouldn't normally bother to look at development stories. So I'm wondering if you've got evidence that you did that, and if so, what impression that made on those new audiences, and whether, if you analyse it, whether you had, how much you had to sort of dampen down what you might call the sort of core messages, the kind of root messages that might have gone across in normal development reporting. Whether you had to compromise, whether the degree to which you had to compromise, in a sense, was okay, or whether you had to compromise a little bit too far.
Okay, let's see if you can grab all these 2-3 questions, and anyone with thoughts gone?
Okay, I'll try and take the first question. The local impact, and does it make any difference in terms of the funding in the areas that we're reporting and writing about? I mean, we set out to sort of impact was the most important thing for us really at the outset, that we wanted to make sure that if we were doing these stories that there was some real world tangible effect on the back of it. On small scales, that has meant that projects and various things that we have featured have had upticks in terms of individual donations. In terms of wider kind of policy, I would say that we've had some success with some of our Yemen reporting, and that it's been raised in questions to, for example, Boris Johnson, or it's being brought, that reporting is being brought then in front of government. But the tangible then, how do we then track that to what the impact on the other side? I think that's a really hard thing for all of us right now to do in journalism, right? And to sort of trace our stories back to where the funding point changes and how much we're responsible for that. What's the cumulative effect of lots of people doing development reporting? So I think that's probably an area that we need to, as an industry, maybe look at more. I see Elise from EJC nodding her head. And it's definitely something that maybe we could collaborate a lot more around. On the funders, I mean, this is very new territory, honestly, for CNN to work with funders in this way. EJC were absolutely terrific funders to work with as a sort of a first-time, engagement in the space. I think they set out very clearly what their objectives are, which very much matched where ours was. And I think that for any media organization or for any individual freelancer or anybody who is setting out to sort of engage with a foundation or a funder, you have to really make sure that your objectives and their objectives tally somewhere, or else there will be a disconnect at some point. So for us, that was a very positive engagement. In terms of reaching new audiences then, which absolutely was an objective of our project, and we wanted to make sure we were reaching local audiences. We found that when we looked at we've done a lot of audience crunching on this. We haven't done surveys. That might be something we do this year to try and get something that's a bit more qualitative and less quantitative. But in terms of when we looked at the audience profile for these stories, we were getting pickup in countries where we have traditionally found it quite hard to reach. These stories were also, when we looked at our social performers from the year, be that on, referral traffic through Instagram, for example, the As Equal stories were among, I think two of them were in the top 5 most referred stories from across the year. In terms of social traffic and social referrers, when you looked at those kind of leaderboards for last year, it was packed full of stuff from As Equals. So these stories had sort of a higher social index, but also equally when we put them on the front page, in terms of that direct audience to CNN, which is quite different to the social audience, they were still really connecting there too. On the question of sort of do we have to water it down, I felt that we didn't, to be honest. I do think that we sometimes had to we had to approach it slightly different, sometimes put a harder angle on it, look for the really sort of the harder news lens, or to really find people where there were sort of, just to, with the kind of the WhatsApp story, it was looking for those, and we did something on revenge porn as well. These are, revenge porn is a massive subject no matter where you are in the world. So finding those big themes that are universal was, I think, really important to how the whole project really lifted and found an audience.
Okay, Stan or Guiomar, quickly on either of the topics.
I'd like to go into the topic of the funding. We worked with the EGC, the European Journalism Center, and they got the funding from the Gates Foundation. So, but they really operated as a firewall. I never had any contact with someone of the Gates Foundation. At the same time, and you keep running into the Gates Foundation if you report on poverty, food security in Africa, because they are everywhere, and but our reporters, I hope and I trust them to be good reporters and to always be critical. And in our op-ed section, we had some debate about the Gates Foundation and about their projects, and that was totally fine. I never heard anything about that. And concerning our audiences and reaching young audiences, I wish we had this amazing data team that could see everything. But what really surprised me was that at our events, we had a really, really young audience. So that was interesting. And also, we didn't compromise on our coverage. I'm really sure about that. It's just that we didn't reach, or through our newspapers and through our regular news website, we reached our regular audience, our 50+ white people, and we really used social media to get to people who are interested in food, who are interested in living responsibly and being responsible for the world. So I think that's also a big topic that people are dealing with nowadays. Young people, they're really, that's it. Sorry.
Well, as I said before, the engagement of readers in this particular project, and also in other related to this reporting, I think is the factor that makes a difference in this type of contents. The most important part of our analysis was that they spend more time reading the text and interacting with the stories than the average of readers in other content of our website. So I think it's a good path to follow in this coverage and other similars.
Okay, we have time for one super quick question before we wrap up.
Hello, I just wanted to ask for Futsalzak, did you work with any voices, African voices, in terms of telling their own stories at all? Yeah, and also, do you do anything with translation to ensure that the people that you're writing about actually read about themselves in any way?
So the op-ed strand of the series was mainly about women writing about women, and very much we tried to make sure that we were finding women from the countries that we were specifically writing about, and that was really important that we did that. I think the big thing that we've got to do in our second year, and it was probably the largest learning, and we got at it a little bit last year, but we wanted to work a lot more with journalists who are living in the countries where they're reporting. So, we had, for example, one of the earliest pieces that we did, we managed, it was a piece that Rosalind Warren was reporting, where we actually ended up using images from a local journalist in Malawi, who we then later commissioned in the series at the end of the year, after we found them, to write a piece later on. And this was sort of the goal through the 12 months, was to build out, using local journalists, which, we were successful in some cases. In Yemen, we were very successful with working with an excellent local journalist there, Lesotho, Malawi, Nigeria, and already this year then Ghana. This is the biggest, though, part of what we want to do this year, is working less with local journalists as fixers, which I think happens so often. They are the fixers involved in some of the best journalism that we read, but they're not in the bylines, or they're not in front of, on camera. So for year two, that's one of the biggest things that we're going after, to really change and shift that balance.
Well, to be really quick, I wish we had done it more, and we should have translated a lot of the stories. But at the same, we talked about it a lot. But at the same time, they were all written from a Dutch standpoint. So we would have a story about Rwandese coffee and coffee plantation, but it was mostly also about this Dutch consumers and what their responsibilities are. So that's not relatable. But if I would do this again, I would from the beginning make a big effort to make it more inclusive and to have more voices, more African voices, actually.
I get the sign. We need to close to get the next session a minute or two to set up for their session. Thank you so much. If you want to continue the conversation, I suggest we do it outside.